the SNP has accused the Scottish Family Party of being disgusting, harmful and deeply offensive. So where should we start? Let's start at the very beginning, shall we? Now, I remember a few years ago, Nicola Sturgeon went to Auschwitz and had lots of pictures taken, and she did all the, we're going to make sure this never happens again type thing. And I found it quite frustrating listening to it, because of course condemning the evils of the past is easy. That's a safe thing to do. Whereas it comes to the evils of the present, well, that can be a bit riskier, can't it? And when I heard Nicola Sturgeon talking about her condemnation of the Holocaust, which is obviously everyone virtually joins in condemning, I thought, how about her approval and enacting of abortion in Scotland, the mass killing of unborn children? And that tension I found quite frustrating. And then to take it a step further, she's now trying to introduce buffer zones around abortion clinics to prevent any sort of prayer vigils or protest or witness or whatever you want to call it outside them. So again, my frustration at Nicola Sturgeon's hypocrisy was ratcheted up another couple of levels. So eventually I thought, right, I know the way to make this point. So I did a sequence of tweets, and they said this. Mass killing by the state took place at Auschwitz, justified by the dehumanization of Jews. Mass killing by the state takes place at abortion facilities in Scotland, justified by the dehumanization of the unborn child. Nicola Sturgeon expresses horror at the Holocaust, yet approves of the killing of unborn children now. Not only does she approve, but she's determined to prevent prayer vigils at abortion facilities by implementing buffer zones. And then I made an image, and the image was Nicola Sturgeon, one of the PR pictures at Auschwitz, and I put on her thinking there should have been a buffer zone around this place. So I explained, the point of the image is that if Miss Sturgeon were to be consistent in her views, she would either oppose abortion and condemn the Holocaust, like us, or approve of abortion and not condemn the Holocaust. In the case of the latter, to be consistent, she would also want a buffer zone around Auschwitz. I also pointed out the Conservative, Lib Dems, Greens and Labour are all pro-abortion as well. So there's the image. I made it absolutely clear what we were saying underneath. We oppose industrial scale killing, past, present and future. Now obviously we're used to having the response when we put forward a pro-life message. Lots of people routinely reply, you're disgusting, you should be ashamed of yourself, you're dangerous, that's evil, you're hateful, or whatever. So you get this sort of flare up in response, really hysterical response. Now basically accusing people who are pro-abortion of sharing some views, sharing a philosophy, or having some moral common ground with the Nazis enacting the Holocaust is obviously extremely challenging. It is incendiary, it is provocative, but it is justified. Because what are you going to use as a parallel for like mass killing enacted by the government? I mean, what should you use other than the most infamous incident of mass killing sponsored by, enacted by a government? So then the parallel is clear enough to justify using it. Now, some people might say, that's making light of the Holocaust. It's not making light of the Holocaust. It's pointing out Nicola Sturgeon's hypocrisy. Shouldn't use a Holocaust image. Was that really a Holocaust image? Wasn't it an image of Nicola Sturgeon's? It was Nicola Sturgeon's PR photograph. Anyway, so I decided to use that. And I was expecting that maybe it would provoke quite a response. It might get media coverage. Now, in order to get a pro-life message in the media, the way we have to do it is to present the media with something that they think is a bad news story on us. They will never run an article that says, activists defend the lives of unborn children. Never. You'll never see a headline at all. The headline has always got to be a bad news story. So the vigils at abortion clinics, they can present those as the pro-life people are bad. So it's a bad news story about pro-life activists. So they will run that sort of story. And I thought with this as well, they will probably run the story. So it's like the idea of a sugar-coated pill. The media think they've got a bad news story about us, but in telling the bad news story, within it is our message. And our message reaches a larger number of people. Now this one, I have to confess, when I thought this one through, I thought, yeah, this is a bit close to the edge. Maybe you might think, well, that this was a bit borderline. Maybe you think it wasn't quite what you would have done, whatever. But still, the result of it is that the pro-life message was published in a number of newspapers. Now, before we go on to the newspapers, let's go to Twitter, because the first response of a lot of people, especially on Twitter, social media in general, but especially on Twitter, is if they see something they don't like, report. Report it in the sense of, right, come on, Twitter, do something about that. Now, to Twitter's credit, it was reported, and they sent an email saying, we have investigated the reported content and have found that it is not subject to removal under the Twitter rules. So, well done, Twitter, really. So let's move on to the newspaper coverage. It was in the National. You have to pay to read the National. I'm not going to pay to read it. So there was a report in the National, but it'll just be similar to the others. So this is the one from the Herald. Right, Scottish family party blasted for shameful Holocaust joke. Well, first of all, it wasn't a joke. It's a meme. It wasn't intended to make people laugh. It's intended to make a very serious point in a visual manner. So the Herald's got a picture of me sort of out of the archive from my GTCS case. I mean, could they not just screenshot something more recent to get a better quality picture? I mean, this is not a lot of effort went into this article. Let's put it that way. Right, so let's look at the report. The Christian, in speech marks, political group, right? We don't claim to be a Christian political group. So why they say that, I do not know. Previously branded far-right by an anti-fascist organisation. Right, we'll come on to that later, because they mention that again later. Right, a Labour MSP said it's deeply offensive and stupid, you should be ashamed. David Baddiel, a comedian, said who's campaigned against anti-Semitism, said it was tiresome. It says, of many things social media has encouraged, reaching reflexively, unthinkingly, and with zero historical understanding for the Holocaust as an instant comparison for your issue is maybe the most tiresome. Well, I would possibly agree with him there. When people reach for it in context where it has no proper application, there's no real parallel. But I think with the case of abortion, the parallel is actually quite strong. Herald as well repeated this thing that allegedly I've compared gay marriage to incest. Now that gets repeated every now and again by in hit pieces. I mean, it's basically just simply not true. I'll tell you where it comes from. It comes from a few years ago. There was a petition lodged with the Petitions Commission at the Parliament, and the petition was saying you should legalise incestuous sexual relationships. And the committee of the Parliament said no. And I pointed out that, okay, I agree with them. They should have said no, but the arguments in favour of incest are similar to the arguments that the Parliament had accepted in favour of gay marriage. So the way I wrote it, I think it was in a letter to a newspaper, was the committee disagreed with the notion that mutual love alone serves to validate a sexual relationship. Is this the same Parliament that introduced same-sex marriage, accepting as unanswerable arguments such as these? So I just pointed out that arguments for incest were similar to arguments for same-sex marriage. Is that comparing gay marriage and incest? No, not a way at all. They're saying similar arguments can be used for them. But when it comes to journalists and hit pieces, and they use the word compared, assuming people are going to understand it as equated. It's as though I said gay marriage and incest, they're like the same thing. They're similar. I didn't say anything remotely like that, but obviously that doesn't bother the Herald. It says the Scottish Family Party oppose the NHS giving fertility treatments to anyone other than heterosexual couples. Yes, indeed, we believe children need a mum and a dad, ideally, so children shouldn't be brought into the world deliberately with the knowledge that they're not going to benefit from a mother and a father figure. Right, at the end of the Herald report, in their State of Hate report, the anti-fascism organisation Hope Not Hate profiled the Scottish family in a section on far-right groups in the UK. Now, Hope Not Hate is, I mean, some of the people who run it are communists. I don't mean I describe them as communists. I mean, one person at least is a member of the Communist Party of Great Britain. So this extreme left-wing group, instead of calling themselves like, Communist Activist Society, they call themselves Hope Not Hate. and they produce reports where anyone that disagrees with their agenda they call hateful, and put them on their state of hate report. I mean, quite a few conservative politicians are in there. I mean, Boris Johnson got a section in the last report. The Reform Party UK, I mean, you name it. Anyone who's not in line with sort of hard left ideology gets a mention in the Hope Not Hate report. But it works very nicely for them, because then journalists can just quote it. Most people reading it think, I've no idea who those people are. Hope Not Hate, that sounds like they're the nice people. So if they're saying, the Family Party is a far right group, well, I don't know. How many people are going to say, all right, I'm going to go and do a bit of research. Hope Not Hate, have they got any credibility? Are they some sort of neutral source? Well, not many people will do that. And the Herald as well either hasn't bothered themselves or know full well that Hope Not Hate is a sort of communist or pretty close to communist organisation. Right, what didn't the Herald do? Well, what the Herald didn't do was pick up the phone and phone me up, or just drop us a quick email asking for an explanation. Even our explanation on Twitter, they didn't even reproduce that. So the standard of journalism there is absolutely appalling. I was going to describe it as student newspaper journalism, but it's nowhere near that standard, and it's just disgraceful, frankly. Now, I find the Herald, actually, the journalism is usually pretty good and well researched and quite fair, but to describe this as a lapse maybe would be charitable. But as I say, they should be ashamed of this standard of journalism, because it's just dire. It's like a student activist being given the freedom to just take their angry blog post and publish it in the Herald. Anyway, in the Herald's to the Herald's credit, they did publish a letter from me today. And again, if you look at our philosophy, what we're trying to do is get the pro-life message into the mainstream media. So as a result of this, what I'm going to read next was published in the Herald today. Why no horror at killing the unborn? In your report of our recent challenging tweet, Scottish Family Party blasted for shameful Holocaust joke, you omitted to include our explanation of it. So I reproduced my whole explanation, which I read earlier. And then I finished with, according to the SNP, this comparison is disgusting, harmful and deeply offensive. Instead of just throwing subjective disapproval, how about explaining why the SNP is happy to dehumanize and kill unborn children? Killing the unborn, that's our idea of harmful. So the Herald's redeemed themselves somewhat there, saying a strong pro-life message has gone there. I'll go to another newspaper report in a minute. An SNP MP on Twitter as well suggested that the tweet could be anti-Semitic. I mean, how does that make any sense? How can condemning the Holocaust be anti-Semitic? But with these people, it doesn't need to make any sense. It's just all emotional, flinging out insults and condemnation. To actually think through what something means, well, that's not really their department. Right, we now go to the Daily Record. I say the Herald I found normally as quite a high standard of journalism, and the Daily Record has run the most ridiculous hit pieces about people involved in the 40 Days for Life prayer vigils at abortion clinics, and generally, I mean, their standards of neutrality are non-existent. I mean, they're biased beyond belief. So anyway, let's see what they've got to say there. Just to mention here as well, did we compare buffer zones to concentration camps? No, that is just flat wrong. So I'd urge the Daily Record, if you want to present some sort of interpretation of this, you need to have someone writing it who's capable of understanding the points being made. Well, they quoted our explanation on Twitter, even though they missed part of it out, which I guess was a mistake, so at least that's something. Right, so an MSP saying it's appalling, crass, insensitive, shameful. The Scottish Family Party are a disgraceful and extreme party. Even by their standards, this is appalling. If they had any decency, they'd remove it. Monica Lennon, Labour MSP, disgusting and dangerous rhetoric. SNP spokesman, disgusting, harmful and deeply offensive. But in the Record, they did a big image showing our image, and therefore in pretty big type with these words: mass killing by the state took place at Auschwitz, justified by the dehumanization of Jews. Mass killing by the state takes place at abortion facilities in Scotland, justified by the dehumanization of the unborn child. So to conclude there, as I explained earlier on, in order to get our message in the mainstream media, they need to think they have a bad news story about us. So if we do something, for example, when we projected onto the doors of an abortion clinic, that got our message into the media, because their story was, look what some really bad people have done, but then the pro-life message comes through it. Similarly, when we projected images from the sex education materials onto the pavements of Perth, it was reported in newspapers as, look what these terrible people are doing. But within the reports were reports of what's in the sex education and our objections to it. So the mainstream media, our options are to be absent completely, or to engineer it, basically, to use the strategy of making them think they've got a bad news story in order to have our message in their report. So just another couple of things on that subject. I mentioned the Herald earlier on. There was a little bit of a lapse from the Herald. They reported Nicola Sturgeon in a Fringe show, and they quote, well, it looked like a quotation from the headline, Nicola Sturgeon, I can't wait until I don't give an F anymore. But if you read the article, she didn't say that. So that headline was extremely inaccurate. What someone else said, her interviewer said that, and she agreed with him. Now, personally, I've got a bit of a problem with that. If you're really concerned about issues in society and creating a better future for people, protecting children, etc., you don't think to yourself, I can't wait till I can get out of this job and forget about it all. You never think that. If you're on some sort of, I don't know how do you want to call it, moral campaign or whatever, or really worthy cause, you don't dream of the day you can just get out of it and put your feet up. I think it just doesn't work like that. So I'm quite surprised to hear Nicola Sturgeon saying that. Just another thing to throw in here, just happened to come up on the same day, is there's an article in the Spectator by Stephen Daisley, who often writes very interesting articles, and he was talking about Alistair McGonaghy, who leads a little unionist organisation called Force for Good. They go with Union Jacks to independence marches, that sort of thing. Now, Alistair McGonaghy was kicked out of UKIP some time ago for basically Holocaust denial, which is something I've got no time for at all. But it just, by coincidence, happened to raise the issue on the same day. Now, in terms of Holocaust denial, in one of our meetings in a part of Scotland, I won't mention where, someone came along once, and they came to a couple of meetings, and they kept bringing up arguments for Holocaust denial. And I said to them, look, you've come to the wrong shop. We're not interested in that at all. We're not having people coming to a Scottish Family Party meeting and listening to this. So you just got to stop. Don't come to the meetings, or you don't talk. You don't say that sort of thing either. Now, some people might say, someone who's gone down the sort of Holocaust denial path, they must be a really bad person. They must be really anti-Semitic. Now, anti-Semitism is a terrible thing, and it's been a terrible thing for 2,000 years, I would suggest, at least, maybe longer. It's quite a complex issue. I've read quite a bit about it. It's a shocking and sad tale, the history of the Jews in various parts of the world through history. And anti-Semitism often comes up on the extreme right of politics and the extreme left of politics, which again, is quite hard to get your head around, isn't it? But that's what happens. On the other hand, though, if someone's seen some things on YouTube, I mean, this gentleman who came to our meetings was trying to promote Holocaust denial. He sent me an email with a couple of videos in to try and convince me, and I watched them, and it said, how can this line up with this? This can't possibly be true. This must be made up. And I watched the videos, actually, just out of interest, and I thought some of the points that were made, I thought, I don't know the answer to them. That sounds like it might be a reasonable point. I don't know the answer to it. So I thought, right, what do I do? Do I spend the next couple of hours trying to find the answers to it? I thought, no, I'm not going to bother. I don't believe it because I don't find it credible that such a huge thing, huge cover-up and conspiracy could result in, the history of the Holocaust being created deliberately and falsely. I just don't find that credible at all. So I don't need to go and investigate these particular charges where it allegedly doesn't make sense. I thought, I'm not going to bother with that. I just reject it because I find the whole notion incredible. If you imagine a person though who doesn't hold any anti-Semitic views, but they come across some material arguing for Holocaust denial, and let's say they look at it and actually they believe it. Now, unlike me who looked at it and thought, I just don't think this is credible, they watched it and thought, well, actually, I'm sort of convinced by it. It doesn't necessarily make them a bad person. It maybe makes them vulnerable to then be drawn into anti-Semitism. But I think the fact that someone might naively give more credence to Holocaust denial theories than they deserve doesn't necessarily mean that they're anti-Semitic. Anyway, I departed a tangent to some extent there. Just to interrupt myself at that point, to make it clear, I'm not actually trying to defend Alistair McGonaghy at this point. I don't know the fella, I don't know anything about him, really. It was just a general point I'm making. But just to conclude, are there parallels between the Holocaust and abortion? There are parallels, they're very important similarities. They both involve state killing on an industrial scale. Are people going to be extremely offended by that? Of course they are. But my question would be, is it true? And the answer is yes.